The moon called Sarah hung silent in the dark, half broken, its surface scarred with a crater so deep that starlight fell into it and never came back out. For 15 years, no ship came near it. No miner, no scientist, no tourist. The fleet command marked it on every chart with a single red word: forbidden. Children on Earth grew up hearing stories about it, about the warship that had done it, about the captain who had lived when 400 of her crew had not. They called the ship a monster. They called the captain a murderer. Almost nobody remembered that she had also saved 11,000 lives that same day, because monsters make better stories than heroes who cost too much. The ship's name was Ragnarok. It sat now in a scrapyard station called the Boneyard, chained to a docking arm 3 kilometers long, its black hull dulled by dust, its gun ports welded shut by fleet order. Officially, it was being decommissioned for parts. Unofficially, everyone who worked at the Boneyard knew you did not walk under its shadow without a good reason. They said the ship dreamed. They said sometimes its lights flickered on for no reason, in patterns that looked almost like breathing. Captain Elena Voss had not seen it in 15 years. She did not need to see it. She saw it every night when she closed her eyes. She lived now on a small agricultural station called Perrin's Reach, 3 jumps from Earth, growing wheat under artificial suns for a living. Nobody there knew who she really was. She had a different name on her papers, a quieter face after the surgeries, calloused hands from real work instead of a command chair. She liked the wheat. It did not scream. It did not ask her why she had pulled the trigger. She was standing in a field with dirt under her nails when the sky above Perrin's Reach turned the wrong color. It happened at 11 in the morning, station time. The artificial sun dimmed like someone had put a hand over a lamp, and then a second sun appeared, where no sun should be, sitting just past the orbital ring, and it was not a sun at all. It was a fleet. Alien ships, vast and asymmetrical, shaped like broken glass and old bone, unfolding out of nothing, in a formation that stretched farther than the eye could follow. Nobody at Perrin's Reach had ever seen a warship that big. Nobody on Earth had either, not yet, though within the hour, every screen in the solar system would be showing the same impossible picture. Elena stood very still in the wheat, and watched the light bend wrong around the alien hulls, and something old and cold woke up in her chest. She had felt this exact feeling once before. She had felt it the day Sarah died. 3 million kilometers away, in orbit around Earth, Fleet Admiral Toma Achebe was drinking his second cup of coffee when his aide burst into his office without knocking, which in 22 years of service she had never once done. "Sir, you need to see the deep scan feed." Right now. He saw it. Everyone saw it, eventually, because within 6 hours the alien fleet had crossed a distance that should have taken normal ships 3 weeks, and it had done this without any visible drive flare, without any warning, without any attempt at communication. It simply arrived at the edge of the asteroid belt, paused as if considering something, and then began moving toward Earth. Earth's defense fleet was not small. 61 capital ships, 400 escorts, the orbital gun platforms that had been built after the Second Colonial War, specifically to stop anything from doing exactly what these ships were about to do. Admiral Achebe gave the order to intercept at the edge of Mars' orbit, hoping to buy time, hoping the aliens would talk once they saw resistance, hoping for any of the small mercies that peacetime officers pray for, and never quite believe in. The aliens did not talk. What happened at Mars' orbit would later be called, in every history book written afterward, the Ashfall. It lasted 11 minutes. Alien beam weapons that bent light instead of reflecting it tore through shield arrays like paper. Their ships moved in ways that broke the tactical models human computers had spent decades building, sliding sideways through space, as if the laws of momentum applied to everyone except them. By the time Achebe gave the order to fall back, 44 of Earth's 61 capital ships were debris, and the survivors were running for Earth with the alien fleet unhurried behind them, like predators who knew their prey was already tired. Achebe stood on the bridge of his flagship, the last one still intact from the first wave, and watched the tactical display fill up with red. He was 58 years old. He had commanded fleets in 3 wars. He had never in his life seen anything fight like this. "Sir," said his tactical officer, a young woman named Priya Nair, whose hands were shaking on her console. "At this rate of advance, they reach Earth orbit in 19 hours. Casualties?" 22,000 confirmed dead so far, sir. That number is going to get much worse. Achebe closed his eyes for 1 second, which was all the time a commander was allowed to grieve in the middle of a battle, and then opened them again. Get me every ship we have left. Every reserve, every mothballed hull, every training vessel with a working gun. We fight for Earth with what we've got. Sir, our best modeling puts our chance of stopping them at less than 4%, even with full reserves. I know the numbers, Lieutenant. Get me the ships anyway. It was 2 hours later, in a briefing room that smelled of burnt coffee and fear, that someone said the name Ragnarok out loud for the first time in 15 years. It was a young engineer named Marcus Webb who said it. He was not supposed to be in that room at all. He was a systems analyst, 3 ranks too junior for a war council, but he had spent the last 2 hours running every number Fleet Command could throw at him, trying to find something, anything, that might change that 4%, and he kept arriving at the same answer no matter how he built the model. There's one hull that could do this, he said, and the room went quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet, when someone says something everyone was thinking, and nobody wanted to say. The alien beam weapons are cutting through our shields, because our shields are conventional deflector fields. They can't stop a weapon that bends light around itself instead of hitting it directly. We need something that doesn't rely on deflection. We need something that can actually punch a hole in whatever they're using for armor, in one hit, before they get close enough to use that beam on us. An older officer, a woman with gray at her temples and 3 tours of hard service behind her eyes, said what everyone else was thinking. You're talking about the Maw. I'm talking about the Ragnarok, Webb said. The Maw is the only weapon system in human hands that has ever punched through anything like the kind of armor those ships are showing on our scans. It did it to a moon. It also killed 400 of our own people doing it, the older officer snapped. That ship is grounded for a reason, Lieutenant. It's not a weapon. It's a mistake we haven't finished paying for. With respect, ma'am, we don't have the luxury of mistakes we can afford to leave unfixed anymore. We have 19 hours. Admiral Achebe, who had been silent through all of this, finally spoke. Tell me about the Maw. All of it. I want to know exactly what we'd be waking up. So Webb told them, and because the story mattered, and because Achebe deserved the whole of it, before he made a decision that might cost thousands more lives, it is worth telling here as well. 15 years earlier, in the years after the Second Colonial War, Earth's scientists had been desperate for a weapon that could match the growing threat of piracy and rebellion spreading through the outer colonies, and one research team, working under a program with the bland name Project Undertow, had built something nobody quite understood, even after they built it. They called it the Maw. It was, in the simplest terms anyone could manage, a device that created a controlled, miniature collapse of space itself. Not quite a black hole, but close enough to one that the difference mattered only to physicists. Fired at a target, it did not blast or burn. It swallowed. Whatever it touched simply stopped existing in the ordinary sense, folded down into a point smaller than an atom, and then, a fraction of a second later, released back outward, as a shockwave of pure destructive force. It took a warship built specifically to hold it. That ship was the Ragnarok, the first and only hull of its kind, a vessel 3 kilometers long with a crew of 600 and a power core built to feed a weapon that, frankly, nobody was entirely sure was safe to use, even in testing. Elena Voss had been its captain. She had been chosen not because she was reckless but because she was, by every measure Fleet Command used, the most careful and precise officer in the service, the kind of captain who ran drills twice as often as regulation required, and who had never, in 11 years of command, lost a single crew member to an avoidable accident. If anyone was going to test a weapon that terrifying safely, Command reasoned, it would be her. The test was supposed to be simple. Fire the Maw at an uninhabited asteroid, log the results, bring the ship home. It was performed instead near Saira, a moon of a gas giant on the edge of the Sol system, because the science team wanted a body with enough mass to give them clean data on how the weapon scaled against larger targets. There was a small mining outpost on Saira's far side. Command's own survey, done weeks before, said the outpost had been evacuated for unrelated reasons. A labor dispute, a supply shortage, nothing to do with the test at all. Voss had checked that report herself, twice, before authorizing the firing sequence. It was wrong. Nobody to this day knew exactly how the outpost's evacuation status had gotten so badly tangled in the paperwork, whether it was human error or something worse, but the fact remained that when the maw fired, there were still 412 people living and working under Sarah's surface. The maw worked exactly as designed. That was, in some ways, the worst part. It did not misfire. It did not malfunction. It simply did precisely what it had been built to do, tearing a crater 80 kilometers across into a moon that had, until that moment, been someone's home. Voss had not known about the outpost until the readings came back and the ship's sensors, for one horrible minute, tried and failed to find any life signs at all, where there should have been hundreds. She had given the order. She had watched the moon die on her own bridge screen. And in the official inquiry that followed, in the version of the story that reached the public and stayed there for 15 years, all of that nuance about bad survey data and evacuation orders that never should have failed got quietly lost, because it was easier for Fleet Command to have one captain to blame than an entire chain of command to investigate, and because Elena Voss, when asked in her own hearing whether she accepted responsibility, had said yes, without hesitation, without excuse, because 412 people were dead, and somebody had to carry that, and she had decided a long time ago it should be her, rather than the young lieutenants and tired administrators who had also made small, honest mistakes on the road to that outcome. She was quietly discharged. The Ragnarok was mothballed, the maw was sealed, and the story that got told, over and over, in bars and school lessons and cautionary tales for 15 years, was simply this: the warship was too dangerous to fly. She took the fall, Webb said quietly, in that briefing room, for a mistake that wasn't only hers. I've read the actual telemetry logs, not the summary in the public inquiry. The targeting was correct. The weapon worked as designed. The intelligence was wrong, and that wasn't her department. But she's the one who spent 15 years disappearing because of it. Achebe was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered. Is the ship still functional? The hull's intact. Fleet kept it mothballed rather than scrapped, officially for study purposes. The maw itself was sealed but never removed. Nobody's ever figured out how to safely disassemble it. If we can get a crew aboard and run a full diagnostic, there's a chance we could have it combat ready in, Webb hesitated, 8 hours, if everything goes right. Which it won't, entirely, but close. And Voss? Alive, living under a different name on an agricultural station. 3 jumps out. I found her an hour ago, sir, before I came in here. I wasn't sure I should say anything, but... He looked around the room at the tired, frightened faces of officers who had just watched 44 capital ships die in 11 minutes. I think we need her more than we need to be comfortable about asking. Admiral Achebe stood up, and when he spoke, his voice had the particular flatness of a man who has just made a decision he knows will be argued about for the rest of his career, however long that career now had left to run. Send a ship for her. Tell her the truth. All of it, not the polite version. Tell her Earth needs the Ragnarok, and Earth needs its captain. And if she says no, I will not force her, because God knows this world owes her the right to say no. But ask her properly. Look her in the eye when you do it, Lieutenant. You found her. You go get her. Webb swallowed. Yes, sir. And somebody wake up that ship. Quietly, before the crews start hearing what we're doing, because half of Fleet still thinks that hull should be dropped into a star. I want the Ragnarok systems coming back online within the hour. I want to know what we're actually working with before Voss even gets here, so she isn't stepping onto a ghost. 19 hours. Less, now, with every minute spent talking instead of moving. Achebe looked at the tactical display, at the red wall of alien ships crawling steadily closer to the blue dot that was Earth. And he thought about the 4%, and about the ship in the boneyard that dreamed with its lights, and about a woman standing in a wheat field 3 jumps away, who had spent 15 years trying to forget the sound 400 people's absence makes on a sensor board. Move, he said. All of you, now. On Perrin's reach, Elena Voss was still standing in her field, when a small courier shuttle broke atmosphere above her, running hot and fast, and clearly military despite its attempt at civilian markings. She watched it come down in the dirt road beside her field, scattering wheat dust into the artificial sunlight, and she felt, with a certainty that settled into her stomach like a stone, that whatever was inside that shuttle was going to say her name. her real name, the one she had buried 15 years ago along with 412 people she had never met, but would never stop knowing. A young man climbed out, dust already on his boots, his uniform crisp and new in a way that told her he had never seen real combat, and he looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional, and mostly succeeding. "Captain Voss," he said, "my name is Lieutenant Marcus Webb. I'm sorry to intrude on you like this. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't the end of the world." She looked past him, up at the sky, where even from the ground she could see the faint new star that had not been there yesterday, small and wrong and patient. She had spent 15 years growing wheat so that she would never again have to look at a sky and know, in her bones, that something terrible was coming. "Tell me," she said, and her voice, after so long unused for anything but small talk about grain yields, came out steadier than she expected. So he told her. About the fleet. About Mars orbit and the ashfall, and the 44 dead capital ships. About the 19 hours, now down to 17, and the 4% chance, and the one weapon in human history that had ever proven it could open something like alien armor, and the one ship built to carry it, sitting right now in a scrapyard with its lights beginning, for the first time in 15 years, to flicker back on. When he was finished, Elena Voss stood in her wheat field for a long moment, saying nothing, and Marcus Webb had the strange, unsettling sense that she was not looking at him at all, but at something behind him, some old shape only she could see. "You want me to fly the ship that killed 400 people, she said finally. "I want you to fly the only ship that might save 8 billion, he said. "I know that's not a fair trade to ask anyone to make. I'm asking anyway, because there isn't time to find a fairer one." Elena Voss looked down at her hands, calloused now from honest work, and thought about the wheat she would leave unharvested, and the quiet life she would leave unfinished, and the ship in the dark that had never once, in 15 years, stopped waiting for her. "Get me to the boneyard," she said, "and pray to whatever you believe in that the maw still remembers how to be careful." The shuttle lifted off Perrin's Reach 11 minutes later, carrying a woman the history books called a monster, back toward a ship the whole fleet called a mistake, while behind them, unseen and unhurried, the alien fleet continued its long fall toward Earth. The boneyard smelled the same as Elena remembered it, which surprised her more than she expected. 15 years, and the recycled air still carried that faint metallic bite of old coolant and older regret. She stepped off the shuttle onto a docking gantry that groaned under her weight, and above her, filling the whole sky of the station like a black moon, hung the Ragnarok. It looked smaller than she remembered, and also somehow larger, the way things from childhood always do when you see them again as an adult. 3 kilometers of dark hull, its gun ports still welded shut exactly as she had last seen them, its running lights dark except for a slow, uneven flicker along its spine that made her chest tighten before she could stop it. She had told herself for 15 years that the stories about the ship dreaming were nonsense, station workers scaring each other in the dark. Standing under it now, watching those lights pulse in a rhythm too slow and too deliberate to be a malfunction, she was no longer so sure. Marcus Webb stood beside her, trying not to stare at her the way she could feel him staring, the way everyone had stared at her for the first year after Sarah, before she learned how to disappear properly. "Diagnostic teams have been aboard for the last 4 hours, he said. "Hull integrity's better than anyone expected. Reactors cold but stable. The problem is," he hesitated. "The maw," she said. "The maw," he agreed. "Nobody's touched its containment field in 15 years. We don't have anyone left in the service who worked on Project Undertow. The 2 lead scientists retired off-grid after the inquiry and won't answer hails. Everyone who actually understands that weapon from the inside is either you, or dead, or hiding, same as you were." Elena looked up at the flickering lights again. "It's not hiding, it's waiting." "Sir?" "Nothing." She started walking toward the boarding tube, and after a moment, Webb hurried to catch up. "Who else is coming? I'm not flying a 3-kilometer warship with 2 people and a prayer." "Command's pulling together a skeleton crew. 120, not the 600 she was built for, but it's what we can crew and vet in the time we have. Volunteers only. Nobody's been ordered onto this ship, given its history. We had more volunteers than slots, actually. People are scared, Captain. Scared enough to volunteer for the ship everyone used to be scared of. That should worry you more than it comforts you, Elena said, and kept walking. She found her old first officer waiting for her in the shuttle bay, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. Daniel Okonkwo had aged the way she had not let herself imagine, gray now at the temples, a little heavier, lines around his eyes that had not been there when he'd stood beside her on the bridge and watched Sarah die. He had not been discharged after the inquiry. He had stayed in the service, worked his way up through postings nobody wanted, and never once, in 15 years, sent her a message, because he understood better than anyone alive that some silences are a kind of mercy. "You look like hell, Danny," she said. "You look like a farmer," he said, and something in his face, that had been tight since she stepped off the shuttle, finally loosened. Just slightly. "Command called me in 6 hours ago. Told me they were reactivating this ship and needed a first officer who already knew her systems. I said yes before they finished the sentence. Even knowing what we're waking up? Especially knowing that." He looked past her, up at the dark hull rising over the gantry. "I've thought about this ship every day for 15 years, Elena. Not the way the news feeds tell it. I've thought about what it actually felt like, standing on that bridge, watching the maw work exactly the way it was built to work. Everyone talks about it like a monster that got loose. It wasn't a monster. It was a perfect tool used with bad information, and I've never been able to decide if that's better or worse than a monster. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Earth doesn't have the luxury of philosophy today." They walked the boarding tube together, and it was strange to Elena how quickly her body remembered the rhythm of the ship, even as her mind fought it. The particular give of the deck plating under her boots. The low hum of systems coming back to life after long silence. The smell of a hull that had once been her whole world. Ragnarok's corridors were wider than any ship she had served on since, built to accommodate the Maw's power conduits, which ran through the vessel's spine like a spinal cord of their own. Thick bundles of cable sheathed in containment alloy that hummed faintly under her palm when she touched one without quite meaning to. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "It's been warm since we brought main power back online 2 hours ago," Daniel said. "Runs warmer than it should, given the reactor's only at 9% output. Engineering can't explain it. I have a theory, but you're not going to like it. Try me. I think the Maw's containment field never fully went dormant. I think it's been idling this whole time, 15 years, on residual charge, doing something in there we don't have instruments sensitive enough to measure. I think that's why the lights flicker. I think this ship has been quietly, patiently awake the entire time we told ourselves it was asleep." Elena did not answer immediately. She had felt something similar herself, standing under the hull, watching those lights pulse like a held breath. "You're right," she said finally. "I don't like it." They reached the bridge 40 minutes later, after Elena had insisted on a full walk of the primary systems, reactor core, life support, the crew decks that would need to house 120 souls in a space built for 600, and last of all, though every instinct in her had wanted to save it for never, the containment chamber that housed the Maw itself. It sat in the ship's lowest deck, a sphere of dark alloy 50 meters across, suspended in a cradle of magnetic supports, so the weapon itself never touched any part of the hull directly. 15 years ago, standing in this same chamber, she had felt something like awe. Now, standing here again, with the weight of everything that weapon had cost pressing down on her chest, she felt something closer to grief, walking hand in hand with fear. The engineering officer running point on the reactivation was a broad-shouldered woman named Chief Petty Officer Aisha Renner, who had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had diffused actual bombs for a living, before transferring to warship engineering, which as far as Elena could tell from her file, was more or less the same job with better pay. "Containment fields holding steady at 91%, Renner reported, not looking up from her diagnostic slate. "That's the strange part, Captain. It shouldn't be holding at 91%. 15 years with no active maintenance. That field should have decayed down into the single digits by now, if it hadn't failed outright. Something's been keeping it topped up." "Keeping it topped up from where?" Elena asked. "The reactor's been cold the whole time." "That's the question I can't answer, ma'am. My best guess, and I want to stress this is a guess, is that the weapon's been drawing trace power from ambient background sources. Cosmic radiation, stray EM fields, whatever it could scavenge, It's not supposed to be able to do that. Nothing in the original design specs mentions any kind of passive energy harvesting, but something in there has apparently been feeding itself for 15 years, just enough to keep from going dark entirely. Elena looked at the dark sphere in its cradle, and for the second time that day, felt the specific cold certainty that the ship had been waiting, not merely sitting. "Chief," she said, "I want full sensor logs of that chamber, going back as far as the archives allow, all 15 years of them, however sparse. I want to know exactly what it's been doing while we weren't looking. That'll take hours to pull and process, Captain. Hours we may not have. Then we'd better start now." She turned to Daniel. "How long until this ship can move under its own power?" "Reactors climbing steady. Full power projected in 6 hours. Weapon systems, aside from the maw itself, are mostly intact. Point defense grid, secondary railguns, standard shielding. All of that's straightforward. The maw is the unknown. Even if the containment field's holding, we have no idea if the firing sequence still works correctly, or what condition the targeting interlocks are in after 15 years of nobody touching them. Then we test it. Test it where, Captain? We don't exactly have a spare moon lying around, and Command's not going to authorize live firing an unstable superweapon inside a populated system with an invasion fleet 16 hours out. Elena was quiet for a moment. "There's an asteroid cluster on the far edge of the Boneyard's debris field. Mining tailings, no habitation, no salvage value. Small enough that a full-yield shot would be overkill, which is exactly what we want. We fire small. We see if the weapon still answers the way it's supposed to. If it doesn't..." She stopped. "If it doesn't?" Daniel asked, though from his face he already knew the shape of the answer. "If it doesn't answer the way it's supposed to, then we've learned that in a debris field instead of in the middle of a fleet engagement with 120 people's lives depending on it. Better to find out now." Word of the test spread through the ship fast, the way important information always does on a vessel where everyone knows, deep down, that their own life depends on getting the details right. By the time Elena reached the bridge to authorize the firing sequence, she could feel the tension in every crew member she passed, the particular quiet of people trying very hard not to think about the ship's history while standing inside the exact chamber where that history had been made. The bridge itself was smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply grown used to smaller spaces in her years on Perrin's Reach. The command chair sat where it always had, facing the main viewport, and when she lowered herself into it, the old leather, replaced once, she noted, sometime in the last 15 years, though the shape was the same, seemed to remember her weight in a way that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. "Captain on the bridge," Daniel said, and the handful of officers present straightened, and Elena felt, for one strange, vertiginous moment, exactly as if no time had passed at all, as if she might turn her head and see faces that had not existed anywhere, except in memory and grief, for 15 years. She pushed the feeling down. There was no room for it today. "Chief Renner," she said, "status on the maw. Containment stable at 91%, holding. Targeting interlocks report green across the board, though I want it noted for the record that I don't fully trust a system that's been sitting untouched for 15 years just because it says green. Noted. Bring the weapon to standby power." There was a pause, and then a low sound moved through the ship, a deep, resonant hum that Elena felt in her sternum before she consciously registered hearing it, rising up through the deck plating from somewhere far below, from the chamber where the dark sphere sat in its cradle. "Standby power confirmed," Renner said, and there was something careful in her voice now, something that had not been there a moment before. "Captain, I'm reading a power draw pattern that doesn't match anything in the historical logs. It's like..." She stopped, frowning at her console. "It's like it's already awake. Like standby power didn't wake it up. Like it just noticed we were paying attention." Elena felt the old cold certainty settle deeper into her chest. "Target the asteroid cluster. Minimum yield. On my mark. Target locked. Minimum yield selected." A pause. "Captain, minimum yield setting isn't holding. The system keeps reverting to a higher output value. I've tried resetting it 3 times. How much higher?" Renner's face had gone pale. "Full yield, Captain. Every time. It doesn't want minimum." The bridge went very quiet. Somewhere behind Elena, she heard Daniel's breath catch, just slightly, the sound of a man remembering exactly what full yield had done to a moon. "Chief," Elena said, keeping her voice level through an effort of will that cost her more than she let show. "Can you force the setting manually? Hard override? Bypass whatever's rejecting it?" "I can try, Captain. Give me 60 seconds." The 60 seconds stretched out longer than any minute Elena had lived through since the day Sarah died. She watched the tactical display, watched the small marker representing the asteroid cluster sitting patient and unaware in the dark, and she thought about 412 people who had also been sitting patient and unaware, 15 years ago, in a place that should have been empty. "Override accepted," Renner said finally, and Elena heard the relief in her own exhale before she registered feeling it. "Minimum yield locked. It's not fighting me anymore. I don't know why it stopped, but it stopped." "Fire," Elena said. The maw fired. There was no sound, not really, not in the way a gun makes sound. Instead, there was a kind of silence so complete it felt like pressure, a held breath in the fabric of space itself. And then, on the main viewport, the asteroid cluster simply folded inward on itself and vanished. And a half-second later, a shock wave of released energy bloomed outward, in a sphere of white light, that made every officer on the bridge shield their eyes on reflex, even through the viewport's automatic dimming filters. When the light faded, there was nothing left where the asteroids had been, not debris, not dust, nothing at all, a clean absence in the star field, where matter had simply stopped existing. "Yield analysis," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Renner was staring at her console, and when she spoke, her voice had a note in it that Elena recognized immediately, because she had heard it in her own voice 15 years ago, in the moment after Sarah's readings came back wrong. "Captain," Renner said, "that was minimum yield. The override held. I want that on record. But Captain, the output was still 4 times higher than minimum yield should have produced. It's like the weapon fired at what it wanted, and just let the override think it had won." Nobody spoke for a long moment. On the viewport, the clean, terrible emptiness where the asteroids had been drifted silently against the stars, and Elena Voss sat in the command chair she had sworn 15 years ago never to sit in again, and understood, with a certainty that settled into her like cold water, that the ship beneath her was not a weapon that had gone wrong once and could be trusted again. It was a weapon that had never stopped being exactly what it was, patient and precise and hungry, in a way no human design should have been able to produce. And in less than 16 hours, she was going to have to point it at an enemy fleet and ask it, once again, to hold back just enough to save the people it was aimed at protecting. "Get me command," she said. "Tell them the maw still fires. Don't tell them everything else. Not yet. Not until I understand it myself." Daniel looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same old fear from 15 years ago, dressed now in new gray hair and new lines, but exactly the same underneath. "Do you understand it, Elena?" he asked quietly, once the channel to command was closed. "Even a little?" She looked at the empty space where the asteroids had been, and then down at her own hands on the arms of the command chair, and she thought about lights that flickered like breathing, and a containment field that should have failed years ago and hadn't, and a weapon that let you win an argument only because it had already decided, on its own, what the real answer would be. "No," she said. "But we're out of time to wait until I do." Somewhere far above Earth, unhurried and patient, the alien fleet continued its approach, and somewhere far below the Ragnarok's dark hull, in a chamber built to contain something humanity had never fully understood, the maw settled back into its slow, steady hum, and waited, as it had waited for 15 years, for the moment it would finally be allowed to do again what it had always been built to do. Earth orbit, 4 hours before the alien fleet arrived, looked like a hospital waiting room the size of a planet. Every remaining warship in the system had been pulled into a defensive shell around the homeworld, patched together from 3 different fleet commands and a dozen mismatched classes of hull, crewed by people who had, most of them, never expected to fight in a war that mattered this much. Admiral Achebe stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display fill with icons, his own thin, battered line of ships arranged in a shell around Earth, and beyond them, growing steadily larger with every passing minute, the alien wall advancing without hurry, without mercy, and without, as far as anyone could tell, any interest at all in negotiating. The Ragnarok arrived at the edge of the defensive shell with 40 minutes to spare, and Achebe watched it settle into position at the heart of the formation, with a mixture of relief and dread that he did not try very hard to hide from his staff. It was, without question, the largest and most powerful hull in the system. It was also, by every report reaching his desk in the last few hours, a weapon that nobody fully understood, and that had already shown, in its first test, an unsettling tendency to make its own decisions about how hard to hit something. "Captain Voss," he said over the comm channel, once the Ragnarok had settled into formation. "Welcome back to service. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I, Admiral," Elena said. Her voice, over the channel, sounded exactly as tired as Achebe felt. "I want to be honest with you before this starts. The maw is functional. It is not fully controllable. We got it to fire at the yield we asked for in testing, but only after an override fight I still don't fully understand, and I have no guarantee it will cooperate the same way twice." Achebe was quiet for a moment. "Understood, Captain. Use it anyway. We don't have a version of this fight where we don't." "Understood, sir." The alien fleet crossed the last stretch of open space with the same unhurried patience it had shown the entire way from the belt, and then, without any warning shot or hail, it began to fire. The first wave of alien beams lanced out from the front rank of their formation, and Elena watched on the Ragnarok's tactical display as 3 of Earth's escort ships simply stopped existing in the space of a few seconds, their shields collapsing under weapons that, exactly as Webb had described back in that briefing room lifetimes ago, seemed to bend around conventional deflection fields, as if they weren't there at all. "Formation Echo 3 is gone," Daniel reported, his voice tight. Shields didn't even slow it down. "All ships, hold position." Achebe's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, steady, despite everything. "Ragnarok, you're cleared to engage at will. Everyone else, concentrate point defense on their smaller craft. Keep their fighters off our capital ships. We buy the Ragnarok time to do what it's here to do." Elena looked at the tactical display, at the alien formation now close enough that individual ships were resolving into distinct shapes. Vast, asymmetrical hulls like something grown rather than built. Plates of dark material that did not reflect light so much as seem to drink it. She picked out the largest of them, a ship at the heart of the formation, nearly as long as the Ragnarok itself, bristling with the beam emitters that had already cost Earth 47 ships in 2 engagements. "Chief Renner, target the lead capital ship. Minimum yield sufficient to disable its primary weapon systems. We are not trying to erase it, we're trying to take its teeth." "Targeting, Captain." A pause, longer than Elena liked. "Captain, same problem as the test. The system wants full yield. It's not budging on minimum this time, not even fighting me for it. It's just refusing." "Override it." "Trying. It's not responding the way it did in testing. It's like..." Renner's voice tightened with something between frustration and fear. "It's like it learned from last time, Captain. Like it knows the override trick now, and it's decided not to let me use it again." Elena felt the old, cold weight settle into her chest, the same weight she had felt 15 years ago, in the seconds before Sarah's readings came back wrong. She had a choice in front of her now that was smaller in scale, but identical in shape to the one she had faced then. Trust a system she did not fully understand, or hold back and let people die, while she tried to force it into behaving the way the manual said it should. "Belay the override," she said. "Fire at whatever yield it wants. Target the lead ship. Now, Chief, before that beam array turns on our line." The maw fired. There was the same terrible silent pressure as before, the same held breath in the fabric of space, and then the alien capital ship at the heart of the enemy formation simply folded inward and vanished. The same clean, absolute absence that had swallowed the asteroid cluster in testing, except this time, the shockwave that followed was vastly larger, rippling outward through the alien formation and catching 4 smaller ships in its edge, tearing their hulls open like paper even though they had not been the intended target at all. For 1 full second, the entire alien fleet stopped moving. "Report," Achebe's voice came over the channel, tight with something that might have been shock or might have been hope. "Report. Ragnarok. What did you just do?" "1 capital ship destroyed, 4 escorts critically damaged from shockwave overspill," Daniel reported, staring at the display. "Captain, the rest of their formation has halted advance. They're not firing. They're not moving at all. Elena watched the alien fleet sit motionless in the dark and felt something colder than fear settle over her, because a fleet that stopped and thought, rather than one that simply reacted, was a fleet capable of learning, exactly the way the Maw itself seemed to have learned something between the test firing and this moment. "They're recalculating," she said quietly. "They didn't expect this. Give them a minute, and they'll have a new plan for it." She was right. The alien fleet's pause lasted perhaps 90 seconds, and then it resumed its advance in a new configuration, spreading out wider, no longer presenting a single dense formation for a weapon that could clearly reach across a wide area and take out anything it touched with a single shot. "They're screening the capital ships behind a wall of the smaller escorts," Daniel said. "Smart. If we fire the Maw into that spread, we'll catch escorts, but the yield probably won't reach the capital ships hiding behind them. Chief Renner, can we get finer control on targeting? Something between the minimum we tried and the full yield it keeps insisting on?" Renner's hands moved fast over her console, and Elena could see the strain in her shoulders, the particular tension of someone trying to reason with a system that did not seem entirely interested in being reasoned with. "I'm trying an intermediate value, Captain. 60% yield, wide dispersal pattern instead of point target. Might let us hit more of their spread formation without going full yield on any single point. Do it. Target their new formation, widest spread you can manage." The weapon fired again, and this time the effect was different. Instead of a single clean absence, a whole section of the alien formation flickered and buckled, ships crumpling inward at their edges rather than vanishing outright, some breaking apart, others simply going dark and drifting, disabled rather than destroyed. 6 ships disabled, 2 destroyed outright, Daniel reported. Captain, that's better, more controlled. What changed?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "Maybe wider dispersal is easier for it to manage than a tight point target. Maybe it just decided to let us have this one. Chief Renner, can you replicate that setting?" "I can try, Captain, but I want you to understand something." Renner turned in her seat to look at Elena directly, her face pale but steady. "I'm not adjusting settings on a machine anymore. Not really. Every time I touch that console, it feels less like operating a weapon, and more like negotiating with something that has its own opinion about how this fight should go. I don't know how to give you a reliable answer about what it will do next, because I don't think reliability is a thing this weapon has ever actually offered anyone. 15 years of sitting in the dark hasn't made it safer. I think it's made it more decided about what it wants." Elena absorbed that in silence for a moment, watching the tactical display, watching the disabled alien ships drift dark against the stars, while the rest of their fleet, smaller now by 8 hulls, regrouped at a more cautious distance. "Understood, Chief," she said finally. "Then we don't try to control it, we try to work with it. Keep giving it targets that let it do what it seems willing to do, and we watch very carefully for the moment it stops being willing." Around the Ragnarok, the rest of Earth's defensive fleet fought on. Smaller ships, trading fire with alien escorts, point defense grids, lighting up the dark with a constant sparking rhythm of interceptor fire. Elena watched the wider battle on her secondary display, even as she kept her primary attention on the Maw's slow, strange negotiation with itself, and she saw ships die on both sides, saw an escort captain named Reyes lose his entire command in a single alien pass and keep fighting anyway, with the 2 remaining fighters under his authority, saw a hospital ship that had strayed too close to the front line get pulled to safety in the last possible second by a tug crew that would later receive commendations nobody would have time to properly celebrate. 3 hours into the engagement, with the alien fleet reduced by roughly a third and Earth's own losses climbing past 60 ships, Achebe's voice came over the fleet channel again, rougher now with fatigue and the particular strain of a commander who had been making life-and-death decisions faster than any human mind was built to manage. "Ragnarok, status report. We need to know if you can keep this pace up. Reactors holding at 81% output and climbing steady," Daniel reported. "Containment field on the Maw is—" He stopped, frowning at his console. "Captain, containment's dropped to 78%. It was at 91 before we started firing." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "Chief Renner?" "Confirmed, Captain. Every shot we fire, containment drops a little more than the design specs say it should. At this rate, we've got maybe 6 more firings before we're looking at instability." "Define instability." Renner was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, Her voice was carefully, deliberately level. The voice of someone choosing not to panic out loud. Total containment failure, Captain. If that field collapses while the weapon's charged, the release wouldn't be aimed at anything. It would just happen, right here, inside our own hull. The bridge went very quiet. On the main viewport, the alien fleet continued its patient, methodical advance, and somewhere in that formation, Elena knew, capital ships were still hidden behind their screen of escorts, still carrying enough firepower to finish what the ashfall had started at Mars orbit, if the Ragnarok stopped firing, or stopped existing, whichever came first. How many capital ships do they have left? Elena asked. Sensor estimate puts it at 11, still hiding behind their escort screen, Daniel said. We've taken out 3 so far, disabled others, but the core of their real firepower is still intact. 6 shots left, by Renner's estimate, against 11 capital ships still protected behind a wall of smaller vessels. The math did not work, not with the weapon's current level of cooperation, not with containment bleeding away faster than anyone had planned for. Elena sat very still in the command chair for a moment, feeling the weight of 120 lives on this ship, and thousands more on the ships around it, and 8 billion more on the world turning quietly below them, unaware for the most part of exactly how close the math had come to failing entirely. Then we make every shot count, she said. Chief Renner, I want you working with the tactical team to find the configuration that lets us catch the most capital ships per firing, even if it costs us more containment per shot. We are not going to get a 7th chance to fire small and careful. We're going to get 6 chances to be as effective as this weapon will let us be, and then we find out what it does when it runs out of patience. Understood, Captain. Renner's hands were already moving. Recommend we wait for them to regroup their capital ships into a denser formation before we fire again. They've been spreading out to avoid exactly the kind of hit we want to land, but if we can bait them into consolidating. Do it. Daniel, get me a Chebe. He needs to know the real numbers, not the polite version. The channel opened, and Elena told the Admiral everything. The 6 shots, the containment bleed, the weapon's strange, growing tendency to make its own choices about yield and target. And when she was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the channel, before Achebe spoke again. Captain Voss, he said, 15 years ago, you told an inquiry board that you took responsibility for what happened at Sarah. No excuses, no qualifications. I've read that transcript more times than I can count in the last few hours. I need you to give me the same kind of honesty right now. Can you win this fight? Elena looked at the tactical display, at the alien fleet regrouping cautiously in the dark, at the small marker representing the Ragnarok sitting at the heart of Earth's thin, battered line, carrying inside it a weapon that seemed to have opinions of its own about how this war should be fought. I don't know if I can win it, Admiral, she said, but I know this ship wants to try, and after everything it's cost, I think we owe it the chance to find out what that's worth. Somewhere far below them, on a homeworld that had no idea how narrow the margin had become, 8 billion people went about the last ordinary hours of a war they did not yet know they were fighting, while above them, in the dark, a weapon humanity had built and never understood, settled deeper into its own strange, patient hunger, and waited for its next chance to prove exactly what it was capable of. The alien fleet took 40 minutes to regroup, and Elena spent every one of those minutes doing something she had not expected to do again in her lifetime, talking to the Maw. Not literally, of course. She was not foolish enough to believe the weapon could hear her, or understand her, in any sense a sane person would recognize. But she sat in the command chair with a direct feed open to the containment chamber's sensor array, watching the slow pulse of the field readings, the strange rhythm that Daniel had once compared to breathing, and she found herself murmuring to it under her breath, the way she used to murmur to frightened crew members in the seconds before a dangerous maneuver, not because words changed anything, but because saying them out loud sometimes changed her. I need you to trust me the way I used to trust my crew, she said quietly, so quietly that only Daniel, standing close beside her chair, could have heard it at all. I know you don't work like that. I know you're not what the reports say you are, not entirely mechanical, and not entirely alive either. But whatever you are, you kept yourself half awake for 15 years, waiting for someone to give you a reason to do what you were built for. I'm giving you a reason. Help me make it count. Daniel said nothing, but she saw him glance at the containment readout, and saw something shift in his expression that told her he had noticed the same thing she had. In the 90 seconds after she spoke, the field's slow, uneven pulse smoothed out, just slightly, into something closer to steady. "Captain," Renner said from her station, her voice careful. "Containment just stabilized 2 points above where the models predicted it should be at this stage of the bleed rate. I don't have an engineering explanation for that." "Log it anyway," Elena said. "Log everything. Somebody's going to need to understand this ship properly someday, even if that somebody isn't us." The alien fleet's new formation resolved on the tactical display 40 minutes later, and it was, exactly as Renner had predicted, denser than before. 11 capital ships, drawn back into a tighter cluster at the heart of their remaining force. Their earlier caution apparently outweighed by whatever calculation had led them to conclude that concentrated firepower now mattered more than dispersed safety. Elena wondered, watching the formation tighten, what kind of pressure was driving that decision on the other side of this fight. No invading fleet regrouped this carefully, this precisely, unless something was pushing them to finish the job quickly rather than cautiously. "Chief Renner, entering weapons range in 90 seconds, Daniel reported. "This is our best shot at the formation you were hoping for." "Target the cluster. Widest effective dispersal," Elena said. "Same configuration as our second successful shot. Let's see if it remembers cooperating." The maw fired, and this time the shockwave that followed the initial collapse was larger than anything they had produced yet, rippling outward through the dense alien cluster and catching 7 ships across its spread. 4 capital ships torn open at their hulls, 3 smaller escorts obliterated outright in the blast center. On the bridge, a ragged cheer went up from the junior officers before Daniel's raised hand quieted it, because everyone present understood, without needing to be told twice, that a fight this costly did not deserve celebration until it was actually finished. "Containment down to 61%, Renner reported, and her voice had lost some of its earlier steadiness. "That shot cost us more than the models predicted too, Captain. Same direction as the earlier stabilization, but the opposite result. It's like it gave us something extra when we needed patience, and took something extra back when we needed power. I don't think this is randomness. I think it's making trades." Elena filed that thought away, because there was no time now to examine it properly, not with 7 alien capital ships still intact and turning, with obvious and sudden fury, directly toward the Ragnarok. "Incoming beam fire, multiple vectors," Daniel called out. "They've identified us as the priority target. All remaining capital ships converging fire." "Evasive pattern, all thrusters," Elena ordered. "Chief Renner, redirect all available power to forward shields. We need every second we can buy." The Ragnarok shuddered as the first alien beams found their mark, shield generators screaming under a load they had never been designed to withstand from this many simultaneous sources. On the tactical display, Elena watched shield strength drop in real time, faster than any of the models had projected, and understood with sudden, cold clarity that the alien fleet had learned something too, that this ship, whatever terrible weapon it carried, was still just as vulnerable to concentrated fire as anything else, if enough of them turned their attention to it at once. "Shields at 40% and falling," Renner called out. "Captain, we cannot take another volley like that one." "Options," Elena said, looking at Daniel. "We fire again, now, before they can land a second volley," he said. "It's our only chance to reduce their numbers before they finish us." "Containment's at 61%, Renner warned. "Another full-power discharge like the last one could push us past safe threshold. I can't promise the field holds through a second shot this soon." Elena felt the weight of the decision settle over her, exactly the way it had 15 years ago, in the seconds before she authorized a test firing that everyone had assured her was safe. Everyone except the one detail that had turned out to matter most. She thought of 412 people who had died, because she trusted a report, instead of asking one more question. She thought of 120 people on this ship, and thousands more on the vessels fighting around it, and 8 billion below, all of them now depending on whether she trusted a weapon she had already admitted, out loud, that she did not fully understand. "Fire," she said. "Full spread, same configuration. If this is the trade it wants to make, let it make it." The maw fired a third time, and the discharge that followed was the largest yet, a silent, terrible collapse that swallowed 3 more capital ships whole, and sent a shockwave rolling outward that finished off the last of the alien fleet's smaller escorts in a single stroke. For a moment, the tactical display showed something Elena had not truly believed she would see. The alien formation, broken and scattered, with only 4 capital ships remaining, all of them damaged, none of them in any position to press an organized attack. Then the containment alarm began to scream. "Field integrity critical," Renner shouted over the alarm, her hands flying across her console. 31% and falling fast, Captain. This is not stabilizing on its own. I need everyone off this deck, now. "Belay that," Elena said, though her heart was hammering hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. "Can you vent excess charge? Bleed off the buildup before it reaches critical failure?" "I can try, but venting that much energy inside the ship's own systems risks frying every circuit from here to the reactor core. And even if it works, it won't fully stabilize the field, only slow the collapse." "Do it. Buy us time. Daniel, get command on the line. Tell them we may have a containment failure aboard and to keep clear of our position." The next 4 minutes were, in Elena's later recollection, the longest of her entire life, longer even than the minute, 15 years ago, when Sarah's sensor readings had come back wrong. Renner worked at her console with the focused, silent intensity of someone diffusing a device that might kill everyone around her at any second, venting charge in careful increments while the containment readout climbed, fell, climbed again, refusing to settle into anything Elena could call safe. It was Chief Petty Officer Renner who finally spoke the words that changed everything, her voice hoarse with 3 straight hours of tension finally breaking. "Captain," she said, "I don't think the field is failing. I think it's choosing not to fail." Elena turned to look at her. "Explain." "I've been watching the collapse pattern for the last 4 minutes, and it isn't following any model I know. Every time it should have crossed into total failure, based on every calculation my board is running, it pulls back at the last possible instant, like something inside is deciding, moment to moment, exactly how close to the edge it's willing to go. That's not a failing containment field, Captain. That's a controlled one. I think whatever is actually managing that weapon has been in complete control of every single shot we've fired today, the whole time, and it's been letting us believe we were fighting it for control, because that's what we needed to believe, in order to keep giving it targets." The bridge was silent, except for the receding wail of the containment alarm, finally beginning to quiet as the field readout stabilized, slowly, at 44%, battered but holding. Daniel looked at Elena, and in his face she saw the same question she was asking herself. "You think it's aware," he said, "not metaphorically, actually aware." "I don't know what it is," Elena said slowly. "I don't think 15 years of sitting in the dark with a slow trickle of scavenged power made this weapon smarter. Exactly. I think whatever it always was, we only ever saw a fraction of it, because we never gave it a reason to show us more. Sarah wasn't a malfunction. Today wasn't luck. I think this weapon has always known exactly what it was doing, and the only real question we've never asked is why it lets us believe otherwise." "Does that change what we do next?" Daniel asked. Elena looked at the tactical display, at 4 broken alien capital ships, regrouping at the edge of engagement range, still dangerous, still capable of turning this fight back around, if given the chance to recover. "No," she said. "It changes what I understand about what we're doing. It doesn't change that we still have 4 ships left to deal with, and a homeworld still waiting to find out if it survives the next hour." She opened the fleet channel. "Admiral Achebe, this is Ragnarok. 4 alien capital ships remain, damaged, regrouping outside effective range. Our containment situation is stable for now, but fragile. Recommend committing remaining conventional fleet assets to finish the wounded ships while they're still disorganized, and hold the Maw in reserve, unless they attempt to consolidate again." "Copy that, Ragnarok," Achebe's voice came back, rough with exhaustion but steady. "All remaining ships, converge on the damaged alien formation. Focus fire on their weakest hull first. Ragnarok, hold position and stand ready. You've bought us this chance. Let's not waste it." What followed was not the clean, decisive kind of victory the history books would later try to make it sound like, when they wrote about this day the way they wrote about every battle, smoothing the terror and the chaos into something with a clear beginning and a satisfying end. It was messy and slow and cost more lives than anyone on that bridge would ever stop thinking about. 2 more escort ships lost in the final push, A hospital tug destroyed trying to pull wounded crew from a burning capital ship. Captain Reyes finally losing the last of his 2 remaining fighters in a maneuver that took out an alien escort, but left him drifting, alone, in a stripped and burning hull, alive only because a rescue shuttle happened to be close enough to reach him in time. But slowly, over the following 90 minutes, Earth's battered fleet closed in on the 4 remaining alien capital ships, and one by one, through concentrated fire and stubborn, exhausted persistence, rather than any single decisive stroke, they were disabled, boarded, or destroyed. The last of them attempted, in its final minutes, something that looked almost like a message, a burst of transmission, on frequencies no human system had ever used before. Untranslatable, brief, and then gone, along with the ship that sent it, torn apart by concentrated railgun fire, from 3 Earth cruisers, closing in from 3 directions at once. Elena watched the last alien hull break apart on her tactical display, and felt, more than victory, an exhaustion so complete, it was almost its own kind of grief. Around her, the bridge crew sat in a silence that was not celebration so much as disbelief, the particular quiet of people who have spent so many hours certain they would die, that surviving feels, for a moment, almost unreal. Containment status, she said finally, because even in the aftermath, the ship's secrets had not stopped mattering. Holding at 41%, Renner reported, her voice thin with fatigue. Stable. Not recovering, but not failing either. Captain, I don't think it's finished with us. I think it's just decided this fight is over for now. Elena looked down at her own hands on the arms of the command chair, and thought about a weapon that had let itself be misunderstood for 15 years, because misunderstanding, apparently, served some purpose she still did not fully grasp. And she thought about the 4 alien ships that had escaped destruction. She checked the tactical logs to be certain. No, all confirmed destroyed. But somewhere out past the edge of the system, whatever remained of the alien fleet's command structure now knew exactly what this weapon could do, and exactly what it looked like when it decided to stop holding back. "Get me Admiral Achebe," she said. "We need to talk about what happens next, because I don't think today was the last time we're going to need this ship to make that choice." Behind her, deep in the ship's lowest deck, the maw settled once more into its slow, steady hum, its containment field pulsing in that same patient rhythm Daniel had once compared to breathing, and if anyone had been close enough, and attentive enough, to notice, they might have thought that rhythm sounded, for the first time in 15 years, almost satisfied. 3 weeks after the battle that the news feeds had already started calling the second ashfall, though this time the name referred to the enemy's losses rather than Earth's. Elena Voss stood again in the containment chamber, deep in the Ragnarok's lowest deck, looking at the dark sphere in its cradle, and thought about how strange it was that a weapon which had cost her 15 years of her life had also, somehow, given her back a version of herself she had thought was gone for good. The system had not stayed quiet after the battle. Within 2 days of the alien fleet's destruction, long-range sensors picked up a second wave, smaller than the first but still large enough to matter, approaching from a different vector entirely, as though the invaders had split their forces from the start, in case the first assault failed. Within a week, a third signal, fainter and farther out, suggested this had never been a single fleet at all, but the leading edge of something much larger, patient and distributed, testing Earth's defenses one wave at a time, the way a careful predator tests a wound before committing to the kill. Command had wanted answers. Elena had very few to give them that satisfied anyone, including herself, but she had given them the truth as best she understood it, because she had learned a long time ago, in a hearing room 15 years past, that half-truths, dressed up as comfort, cost more in the end than honesty ever did. "The Maw is not a machine in any simple sense," she told the War Council, 3 days after the battle, in a room that felt smaller than the one Marcus Webb had first said her name in, though it held twice as many officers now, all of them listening with the particular intensity of people who understood that whatever this woman said next might decide the shape of the rest of the war. "I don't know what it is. I don't think our scientists ever fully knew what they built, back when Project Undertow first created it. I think they built something that could think, in whatever strange way a weapon like that thinks, and then they were afraid of what that meant, and it was easier to call the result a malfunction than to admit they'd made something none of us were prepared to understand." "Are you saying the ship is sentient, Captain?" asked the same gray-templed officer who had objected to reactivating the Ragnarok in the first place, her voice carrying less hostility now than it had 3 weeks earlier, replaced by something more like frightened curiosity. I'm saying it makes choices, Elena said. Whether that counts as sentience is a question for people with better instruments than mine. What I know is this: it let Sarah happen 15 years ago, and it could have refused the firing sequence if it wanted to refuse anything at all, and it did not. And 3 weeks ago, it let 120 of my crew live through a fight that should have killed us all, holding its own containment field together through sheer, deliberate control, right up until the exact edge of failure, and no further. I don't know why it made one choice then, and a different choice now. I don't think it owes us that explanation. I think the only thing we can reasonably ask of it is what we've already been asking: a chance to fight, and a chance to prove it's willing to fight on our side. And if it decides not to be willing anymore? Achebe asked quietly, from his seat at the head of the table. Elena had thought about that question more than any other in the 3 weeks since the battle. Then we lose the only weapon we have that's proven it can hurt them, she said. But Admiral, I don't think fear is the right frame for how we manage this ship going forward. Fear is what turned it into a secret and a scandal for 15 years, and that 15 years of silence nearly cost us this whole war before it even properly started, because nobody thought to ask what a weapon does with itself when everyone who built it decides to pretend it never happened. I think the only way forward is honesty. Study it properly this time. Talk to it, in whatever limited way we can. Stop treating it like a mistake we're managing, and start treating it like what I actually believe it is: a partner none of us fully understand yet, who has, so far, chosen to fight for us anyway. The room was quiet for a long moment after that, the particular quiet of people forced to reconsider something they had spent years being certain about. It was Marcus Webb, sitting near the back of the room in the same junior officer's seat he had occupied during the very first briefing 3 weeks earlier, who finally spoke. Captain Voss is right that we need to study it properly. I'd like to propose that Project Undertow be reopened under new leadership, with full transparency this time, and with Captain Voss given direct authority over how the research proceeds. She's the only person who's actually built something like trust with this weapon. I think that trust is worth more to Earth's defense right now than any amount of caution born out of fear. Achebe looked around the table, at officers who had spent 15 years believing one story about the Ragnarok, and were now being asked, in the space of 3 weeks, to believe an entirely different and far stranger one instead. Objections? He asked. There were a few, quiet and half-hearted, born more out of old habit than real conviction, and in the end, the council approved Webb's proposal, with only 2 dissenting votes, and Elena Voss found herself, for the first time in 15 years, holding a rank and a mission that did not require her to hide who she was or what she had done. She spent the following months in that containment chamber more often than anywhere else on the ship, sometimes with a full research team gathered around sensor arrays and diagnostic panels, sometimes alone, late at night by the ship's arbitrary clock, simply sitting near the dark sphere in its cradle and talking to it the way she had during the battle, not because she believed the words changed anything measurable, but because she had come to suspect, slowly and without ever being able to prove it, that the Maw responded not to instructions or overrides or careful engineering, but to something closer to intention. It cooperated most fully, she noticed, in the moments when the person addressing it was being completely honest about what they wanted and why, and it resisted, subtly but unmistakably, whenever someone tried to manage it through deception or fear. Daniel Okonkwo remained her first officer through all of it, and Chief Renner led the new, more transparent iteration of Project Undertow's research team, and slowly, over the months that followed, a picture began to form of what the Maw actually was. Not a machine that had malfunctioned once and been unfairly blamed, and not truly a person in any sense human law or philosophy had ever built a framework to recognize, but something in between. A weapon, built with such extreme and unprecedented physics that it had, in the course of its construction, developed something like awareness as a side effect nobody had intended and nobody had been prepared to look for. I don't think it chose to become what it is, Elena said to Daniel one evening, months later, sitting in the ship's now familiar mess hall, with cups of the same bad recycled coffee Every warship in history seemed obligated to serve. I think it just happened, the way growing a mind happens to a child, before the child ever gets a say in it. And then it woke up inside a weapon built to swallow moons, with no one around who thought to ask what that might feel like from the inside. And the only thing anyone ever did was blame it, or fear it, or lock it away and pretend it wasn't there. You sound like you feel sorry for it, Daniel said. I do, Elena admitted. I spent 15 years being the person everyone blamed for something that wasn't fully my fault. I think I recognize the shape of that story better than most people would. The second alien wave arrived 4 months after the first, larger and better prepared, having clearly studied whatever data their scattered scouts had managed to transmit before the Ragnarok destroyed them. Earth's fleet met them further out this time, at the edge of the asteroid belt, better coordinated, better rested, and carrying with them not a single desperate gamble, but a genuine weapon system that its own crew had finally begun to understand, at least a little, and to trust, at least enough. The battle that followed was shorter than the first, and far more decisive. The Ragnarok, this time, did not fight as a weapon being fired by a crew hoping it would cooperate. It fought as something closer to a partnership, Elena giving targets and context, rather than rigid instructions, Renner and her research team monitoring containment with real understanding, rather than desperate guesswork, and the Maw itself. Whatever it truly was, answering with a precision and restraint that the first battle had never shown, taking exactly the shots that were needed and no more, holding its own containment steady through choices Elena no longer needed to interpret as mysterious, because she had spent 4 months learning, as best any human could, to simply ask. When the second wave broke and scattered, fleeing back toward whatever lay beyond the edge of the system they had come from, Admiral Achebe stood on his bridge and allowed himself, for the first time since the war began, a small and genuine smile. "Get me Captain Voss," he said. "Ragnarok, this is command," he said, once the channel opened. "Second wave in full retreat. Preliminary estimates suggest this may buy us years before any third wave is ready to try again, assuming there even is one. Well done, Captain. Well done to your whole crew, and to whatever it is you've got running around in that ship's belly that decided today was worth fighting for." "Thank you, Admiral," Elena said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it without the old weight of grief that had colored every similar moment for 15 years. "For what it's worth, sir, I think it heard you." 2 years later, Earth had rebuilt much of what the first 2 waves had cost it, and the story of the Ragnarok had changed, slowly and imperfectly, in the way stories change when enough people insist on telling the truer version loudly enough for long enough. Children still learned about Sarah in school, but the lesson had shifted, from a simple tale about a monster and a mistake, into something more complicated and more honest. A story about bad information and worse assumptions, about a captain who took the blame others deserved to share, about a weapon nobody understood being locked away out of fear instead of studied out of care, and about what it had taken, in the end, for an entire fleet and an entire world to learn the difference between managing something you're afraid of and actually trying to understand it. Elena Voss still commanded the Ragnarok, though her hair had gone fully gray now, faster than the years alone accounted for, and she no longer thought of the ship as something separate from herself in the way she once had. She still visited the containment chamber most evenings, still spoke quietly to the dark sphere in its cradle, and she had stopped, a long time ago, expecting an answer in any language humans had words for. The answer, when it came in other ways, in a containment field that steadied itself in the exact moments she needed steadiness, in a weapon that had learned, across 2 wars and countless quiet conversations, to trust the woman who had once been ordered to fire it without understanding what it truly was, and who had chosen, instead, to spend the rest of her life finding out. On the anniversary of the second ashfall, Marcus Webb, now a full commander with a research division of his own, stood beside her on the observation deck overlooking Earth's rebuilt orbital shipyards, watching new hulls take shape in the dark, built with lessons the old Ragnarok had taught them at terrible cost. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "coming back, taking the ship out again, after everything it cost you." Elena looked out at the shipyards, at the slow, patient work of rebuilding, and thought about a wheat field on a quiet station 3 jumps from Earth, and a life she had once believed was the only kind of peace left available to her. I regret that it took a war to make me come back, she said. I don't regret coming back. I spent 15 years running from a story I thought I already knew the ending of. It turns out I didn't know the ending at all. I don't think anyone does, until they're brave enough to go back and actually look. Behind them, deep in the belly of the great dark ship still docked at the heart of Earth's defense fleet, the maw settled into its slow, familiar hum, patient and steady, no longer waiting in silence for someone to finally understand it, but resting, at last, in the quiet certainty that someone finally had.